Imagine waking up to a world without sunlight. No bright morning skies, no warm rays touching your face, just endless darkness. While it sounds like science fiction, what if the sun, the star at the center of our solar system, suddenly vanished? Life on Earth would be thrown into chaos. The effects would ripple far beyond losing light. Temperatures would plummet, oceans would freeze, and agriculture would collapse. Soon, breathing would become difficult as the atmosphere deteriorates, and the psychological toll of constant darkness could unravel society. In this video, we'll explore the full scope of what would happen if the sun disappeared, how Earth would respond scientifically, the drastic environmental changes, whether humanity could survive such a disaster, and the mental toll of living without light. While this is purely hypothetical, it reveals just how fragile our existence is and how profoundly every form of life depends on the sun's presence. Sudden darkness and gravity's delay. If the sun vanished without warning, we wouldn't notice immediately. Sunlight takes about 8 minutes and 20 seconds to travel across the 93 million miles to Earth, so everything would appear normal during those final moments. The sun would still seem to shine, the sky would remain bright, and Earth would continue its usual orbit as if nothing had changed. Then, in an instant, total darkness would take over. Without the sun's rays, the moon would vanish from sight, and even the bright reflections of planets like Venus and Mars would fade. Only distant stars would remain visible in the night sky, offering faint points of light. Gravity also travels at the speed of light, meaning after those same 8 minutes, Earth would lose the sun's pull. No longer held in its stable orbit, our planet would drift into the cold expanse of space. Though Earth's rotation would continue, the idea of day and night would become meaningless. As people everywhere struggle to comprehend the sudden loss of the sun, humanity would have only begun to face the catastrophic consequences of this unimaginable event. Immediate impact on Earth's environment. The sudden disappearance of the sun would trigger a rapid chain reaction across Earth's environment. In the first 24 hours, temperatures worldwide would drop by about 5 degrees Celsius, 9 degrees Fahrenheit. Without solar radiation to provide warmth, every corner of the planet would begin cooling. Within a week, global temperatures would plummet by 17-20 degrees Celsius, 30-36 degrees Fahrenheit, plunging even tropical regions into a bitter freeze. The equator, which is normally warm and humid, would experience frost within days, while polar regions would become unimaginably cold. Photosynthesis, the process that plants use to create oxygen, would stop immediately. While oxygen levels in the atmosphere would remain stable for a while, the lack of new oxygen production would eventually disrupt ecosystems, starting with plants and insects. Animals that rely on photosynthesis, directly or indirectly, would struggle to survive within days. Pollinators such as bees would perish, and with them, agriculture would begin to collapse. Additionally, the absence of sunlight would leave cities worldwide in constant night. Even though electrical grids and emergency systems would kick in, there is only so much artificial lighting can do. Power stations reliant on solar energy would fail, forcing a greater demand on fossil fuels and nuclear power plants. This surge in demand would push already fragile energy grids to the brink of collapse. Within days, weather patterns would shift drastically. The winds, which are driven by solar heat, would calm, and ocean currents would start slowing down. Clouds, fog, and other weather formations dependent on solar evaporation would dissipate. The Earth's surface would gradually become eerily still, an ominous silence setting in as natural processes grind to a halt. While humanity could adapt in the short term by using artificial light and heat, these systems would only buy us a little time. The real challenge lies in surviving the relentless cold and lack of resources that will soon follow. The cooling of the Earth. How quickly would Earth freeze? Without the sun's constant energy, Earth's cooling process would accelerate rapidly. In the first week, temperatures would drop by 17-20 degrees Celsius, 30-36 degrees Fahrenheit, turning once warm regions into frozen wastelands. Even areas near the equator, which typically enjoy tropical heat, would begin to experience frost. Within a month, average global temperatures would fall below 30 degrees Celsius, 22 degrees Fahrenheit, colder than the harshest winters in Siberia. Survival would become a race against time as the planet continued to shed its remaining heat into the void of space. Oceans, which store much of the Earth's heat, would act as natural insulators, for a while. The surface water would begin to freeze, forming thick layers of ice. However, since water freezes from the top down, liquid water would remain trapped beneath the ice for several months. Marine life around hydrothermal vents at the ocean floor, organisms that do not rely on sunlight, could survive temporarily. Yet, the freezing process at the surface would cut off oxygen and nutrients, slowly suffocating even these deep-sea ecosystems over time. Within 1 year, global temperatures would plummet to around 73 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, similar to conditions on Mars. Oceans would become massive blocks of ice from top to bottom, leaving only isolated pockets of liquid water near geothermal vents. Glaciers would expand, covering continents and burying cities beneath miles of ice. Places like the Sahara Desert, known for extreme heat, would be blanketed in snow. Most plant and animal life would not survive these conditions. Forests, crops, and grasslands would wither and die, leaving behind barren landscapes. The sudden lack of food would trigger mass die-offs among herbivores, followed closely by the extinction of predators. With ecosystems collapsing one by one, humanity would be left fighting for survival in a frozen world with almost no natural resources. Even human technology would struggle in this deep freeze. Vehicles would become unusable as gasoline freezes at 60 degrees Celsius, 76 degrees Fahrenheit, and exposed metal would become brittle and prone to breaking. Energy grids would struggle to meet the growing demand for heat as fossil fuel reserves dwindle. Wind turbines would be rendered useless by the calm air, and solar panels would provide no energy in perpetual darkness. Ultimately, the Earth's surface would become an inhospitable wasteland, forcing any remaining humans to seek shelter underground or in specially designed habitats. Survival would depend not only on technological innovation but also on cooperation, and resources would become scarcer with each passing day. The relentless cold would mark the beginning of a new ice age, one from which life on Earth might never recover. The collapse of the food chain and agricultural breakdown, the disappearance of the sun would instantly disrupt the delicate balance of Earth's ecosystems, leading to the collapse of the food chain. Photosynthesis would stop immediately, halting the production of oxygen and glucose in plants. Without sunlight, crops like wheat, corn, and rice, staples of the global food supply, would wither within days. Greenhouses, even with artificial lighting, wouldn't be able to replicate the sun's intensity for long enough to sustain agriculture at scale. Within a few weeks, plant-dependent species like herbivores would begin to starve, causing a ripple effect throughout the ecosystem. Insects, the unsung heroes of agriculture, would be among the first to suffer, followed by small mammals and birds. Livestock, such as cows and chickens, would face similar fates as their feed runs out. Scientists estimate that 75% of terrestrial species would face extinction within a few months. Fisheries wouldn't fare much better. Although deep-sea creatures near hydrothermal vents might survive temporarily, fish farms and coastal fisheries would be crippled as surface waters freeze. Oceans cover more than 70% of Earth's surface, but without a functioning ecosystem, humanity would lose a major source of protein and essential nutrients. Governments might initially ration food to slow the crisis, but current food stockpiles would only last a few months. Even countries with large reserves, such as the United States, China, and Russia, would struggle to meet demand as production grinds to a halt. Food riots and looting would likely erupt, as access to resources becomes a matter of life and death. Attempts to grow food using artificial light and underground farms could offer a temporary solution, but scaling these methods to support billions of people would be impossible. In the end, the collapse of agriculture and the food supply chain would pose one of the greatest threats to humanity's survival. Starvation would soon become an even deadlier foe than the cold itself, and communities would be forced to make impossible decisions to extend their survival. Impact on the atmosphere and breathing conditions. The sun's energy is not only essential for warmth and light, it also plays a critical role in maintaining Earth's atmosphere. Without sunlight, the processes that sustain the atmosphere, such as photosynthesis and weather patterns, would grind to a halt. The most immediate concern would be the gradual loss of oxygen production, as plants and phytoplankton, the primary sources of Earth's oxygen, stop functioning. While the atmosphere holds enough oxygen to sustain humans for several years, the supply would eventually diminish, making long-term survival unsustainable. Another significant issue would be the breakdown of the ozone layer, which protects life on Earth from harmful cosmic and ultraviolet radiation. With the sun gone, the mechanisms that renew the ozone layer would stop, leaving Earth exposed to deadly radiation from distant stars, black holes, and other cosmic sources. Additionally, the atmosphere would begin to thin and settle closer to the planet's surface. As temperatures plummet, air molecules would condense, making it harder to breathe. Scientists predict that, within a few months, the air pressure at sea level would resemble the thin atmosphere found at altitudes of Mount Everest, around 33% less oxygen than normal. Even healthy individuals would struggle to function in these conditions without specialized equipment. Without weather patterns driven by solar heat, the atmosphere would become eerily stagnant. Winds, rain, and storms would cease, resulting in still air and cloudless skies. Eventually, the lack of atmospheric movement would further disrupt ecosystems and human activities, making Earth a lifeless, frozen wasteland with dwindling oxygen and no shelter from cosmic radiation. Societal and technological breakdown. In a world without the sun, society would begin to unravel as infrastructure and technology fail under the relentless cold. The immediate loss of solar energy would render solar power systems useless, placing overwhelming pressure on fossil fuel and nuclear power plants. However, even these sources would struggle to operate efficiently in freezing conditions. Natural gas lines would freeze, pipelines would crack, and machinery would malfunction as temperatures plunge. Transportation networks would collapse as roads and railways freeze over. Air travel would become impossible, as planes require clear skies, functioning fuel systems, and safe runways, all of which would become unreliable or unusable. Emergency services would also be hindered, and critical supply chains delivering food, medicine, and fuel would break down. Within weeks, cities would be cut off from essential resources, forcing residents to fend for themselves. Communication networks would fail as power grids deteriorate. The internet, radio, and phone systems that rely on power stations and satellites would begin to shut down. Governments, already overwhelmed by the crisis, would find it nearly impossible to coordinate survival efforts. Countries would quickly run out of resources, leading to political instability, civil unrest, and possibly wars over the remaining supplies. With society crumbling, local communities would become the new centers of power. People would seek shelter in underground bunkers or fortified homes, but without sustainable energy and food production, these solutions would offer only temporary relief. As infrastructure collapses, humanity would be thrust into survival mode, living in conditions that resemble a pre-industrial era, where basic necessities are scarce, and survival depends on adaptability and cooperation. Survival options: underground and space habitats. In the aftermath of the sun's disappearance, survival would depend on humanity's ability to adapt to a hostile, frozen planet. Underground bunkers would offer a lifeline, as they could provide insulation from the cold and protection from cosmic radiation. Countries like Norway and Switzerland already have underground seed vaults and shelters designed to protect against global catastrophes. However, these bunkers are limited in capacity, designed for temporary refuge rather than supporting entire populations for extended periods. Geothermal regions, where Earth's internal heat rises to the surface, could become critical survival zones. Areas like Iceland and Yellowstone might offer the possibility of sustaining life by harnessing geothermal energy. However, the availability of resources would be limited, and not everyone would have access to these regions. Space agencies like NASA, SpaceX, and the European Space Agency have already been researching the possibility of off-world colonies, such as on Mars or the Moon. However, without solar power, maintaining long-term space habitats would be far more challenging. Solar energy is a crucial element in current space exploration plans, powering life support systems, communications, and infrastructure. Nuclear-powered systems might provide an alternative, but scaling these solutions quickly would require immense resources, expertise, and global cooperation. Even if nuclear-powered underground facilities were built, the psychological strain on survivors would be immense. Isolated from the surface and forced to ration resources, humanity would be living on borrowed time. Meanwhile, competition for survival could spark violent conflicts over limited supplies. Ultimately, survival in a sunless world would depend on a combination of technology, cooperation, and innovation. But without a clear, long-term strategy, these solutions would only delay the inevitable. If humanity fails to adapt quickly enough, extinction may not just be a possibility, it could become a harsh reality. The psychological impact of perpetual darkness surviving in a world without sunlight wouldn't just be a physical challenge, it would take a profound psychological toll. Human beings are deeply connected to light cycles, with our circadian rhythms, internal biological clocks, regulating sleep, mood, and overall well-being. In the absence of the sun, these rhythms would be thrown completely off balance. People would struggle to maintain regular sleep patterns, leading to widespread insomnia, chronic fatigue, and emotional instability. Seasonal affective disorder, SAD, a form of depression triggered by prolonged darkness during winter months, would become universal. This condition already affects millions of people in places with long winters, such as Scandinavia, where limited sunlight disrupts mood and energy levels. Without any sunlight at all, these symptoms would intensify across the globe, resulting in mass psychological distress. Extended darkness would also isolate people socially, as individuals become disconnected from daily routines, work, and social activities. Panic and despair could spread quickly, especially as food and resources become scarce. Mental health crises would be compounded by the fear of the unknown, as people grapple with the realization that life as they know it may never return to normal. Research shows that humans deprived of natural light for extended periods can develop hallucinations, anxiety, and even psychosis. Without intervention, communities living underground or in bunkers would face psychological collapse. Even with technology to sustain physical survival, the emotional and mental strain of living in perpetual night could become the greatest challenge of all. Maintaining hope in such a world would be difficult, and without it, humanity's fight for survival could unravel long before the physical challenges take their toll. Could humanity survive long term? The disappearance of the sun would mark an unprecedented survival challenge for humanity. In the short term, underground shelters and geothermal zones could keep some people alive, but these solutions are not sustainable for billions of people over years or decades. Global cooperation would be essential, as nations pool resources and technology to build sustainable living environments. However, given the strain on supplies and infrastructure, conflict could become inevitable. Innovation would be humanity's best hope. Nuclear fusion, often referred to as the Holy Grail of energy production, could offer a sustainable energy source, but it remains in the experimental phase. Governments and scientists would also need to explore alternative methods of growing food, such as hydroponics or artificial photosynthesis. Fortunately, astrophysicists assure us that the sun will continue shining for another 5 billion years, so this doomsday scenario is purely hypothetical. But this thought experiment reminds us how fragile life on Earth truly is, and how much we depend on our star for survival. The sudden disappearance of the sun would set off a catastrophic chain of events, plunging Earth into darkness and cold, collapsing ecosystems, and bringing human civilization to the brink of extinction. From frozen oceans and failing agriculture to crumbling infrastructure and psychological turmoil, the loss of the sun would impact every aspect of life. While underground shelters, nuclear power, and geothermal zones might buy us time, survival would demand unprecedented global coordination, innovation, and resilience. Though this scenario is purely hypothetical, it serves as a powerful reminder of how interconnected and vulnerable life on Earth is. Our survival is intimately tied to the sun, a constant force we often take for granted. Preparing for the unexpected, whether through space exploration, sustainable technology, or international cooperation, reminds us of the importance of staying ahead of potential threats. In the grand scheme of the universe, our existence depends on delicate cosmic forces far beyond our control. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let us know, what would you do if the sun disappeared tomorrow?